Good morning. We are on Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph 71A3, the bottom of the Amud. We're at if you're on 71A3, then we are on the first column, and we're the first column in the middle of the first column. So Rav Shimon Omer. So we had a Mishnah. The Mishnah talked about whether you could make a shituf. Shituf, again, the shituf is when you have the courtyards and they have a road in the middle, okay? And the question is how to combine the two chatzeros together, meaning you have a chatzer and a chatzer, that they all open up into this road and you want to carry in this road. So you have something called a shituf, which literally means a partnership that allows them to combine. So the Mishnah spoke about the fact that you had two opinions in the Mishnah. So you had the Tanakama who said that if there's a partnership that is made that they each have wine that they share, if they all have wine that they share, then it's a good eruv. If they have wine and oil that they share, it is not a good eruv. And Rav Shimon says that if they have oil, even if they have oil and wine, which are two separate entities, they don't have to join an eruv. Okay, so we're going to try to analyze today. We're going to analyze Rav Shimon's view. That's going to be our focus. Rav Shimon, who says that even if they have a partnership where there's one partnership with oil and one person partnering with wine, somehow they're still able to join in a partnership. Okay, I just want to be clear on. We'll see what the actual case is. Okay, Rav Shimon Omer echad zeh ve'echad zeh ein tzrichen arev. If there is a partnership with oil and with wine, they don't have to join an eruv. Ask the Gemara. Vafilu zeh b'yayin zeh b'shemen. How does this work? If there's a partnership with one neighbor, he has a partnership with oil, and with one neighbor, he has a partnership with wine. The goal is to make them all combined as one. So how does that work? How does that work if they all have one shared thing like wine, like the Tanakama said, the Chachamim, the Rabbanan said that if they all share wine, okay, that seems to make sense. But if the one neighbor has a partnership with one of them with oil, and that neighbor has a partnership with a different one with wine, how does it all combine? So the Gemara says, we're talking about a courtyard between two separate streets. If you look at diagram A, basically, right, you have three courtyards, and you have a street in between each of the outer courtyards, right? So you see that there's a middle courtyard, and we're going to be focusing on the middle guy, and he's going to have two partnerships: one with the guy on his right, the people on his right, and one with the people on his left. Okay. So, and again, their goal is like this, right? If each of them make their eruv with the people that they're connected to, the people in their own chatzir, that's for Eruv chatzeros. But then shitufe muvaos, what they want to do is the mavoy, the street in between, they want to also to be able to connect, so that to allow them to carry, right? Unless they make a shituf, unless they make some form of a partnership, they wouldn't be allowed to carry in the streets. In other words, step one is you want to make eruv within your own courtyard. Okay, we'll talk about that. We'll come back to that eruv. That's what we've been talking about for a whole while. And what they do is they collect bread, they collect matzah, and they all have a relationship now with the people in their own courtyard. But now they want to go into that street over there before going. There's the Shus Rabbim, which it ultimately opens up to that they can't carry in, but they want to carry in that street over there. That's also a place they want to carry. So the way they do that is they make a shitufe muvos. They make a partnership with the courtyard that is with the courtyards that are next to them. They make a combined partnership with the courtyards that are next to them, and that is the shituf. So what we're suggesting over here is that until now we've assumed we're talking about a case where there's courtyard opening up into a mavui, into a street, and a courtyard opening up into a street. Now we're saying there's actually three. There's two streets, and there's one person in the middle, right? So Rav Shimon L'tamei. Rav Shimon holds it's not Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon said about a slightly similar case. L'maha davar domeh l'shalosh chatzeros hapsuchos zulozu. We have a case of three courtyards opening up one to another. Okay, ufsuchos rishus rabim. Each of these courtyards also open up into the rishus rabim. Ervu shtayim achitzonos ememtzais. Rav Shimon said, remember we had this case a while back. Rav Shimon said if the people on the outer ones, they go ahead and they make a relationship, they make a connection, they make an eruv with the people in the middle, right? Then what happens? Then himu tarasimahin. Then the person in the middle is allowed to go to them. Vehemu tarasima, and they are permitted to go into the middle one. Ushtayim achitzonos asur zamzo. But the two outer ones, since they don't have a connection, they can't go between each other, right? In other words, right? Everything on the case. Let's just draw it out because that's what we like to do. Okay, so we had this case before about a case of Eruv Chatzeros, where we had a case where you have you have all this, and then you have so this is a courtyard with a bunch of houses, and this is a courtyard with a bunch of houses, and this is a courtyard with a bunch of houses, and they all also open up into the public domain. Okay, this is the public domain, Rosh Hashanah Rabbim, public. Okay, so basically, what happens is over here, if these people make an eruv and these people make an eruv, then they're allowed to carry this guy. They're allowed to carry back and forth over here. These two people, they can't go to one another. That's not allowed because even though they're connected over here with this person, they can't do it. That was the opinion of Shimon. The Chum said, no, it's going to be too confusing. The Chum said, you can't do this because they could carry this guy and this guy carry this guy, but they're going to start going ahead and they're going to do this, and therefore the Chum said, off limits. You can't do this. Okay? So that was the case we had earlier on. Now we're talking about a case where it's a little bit similar, but also a little different. And basically we're dealing with a case where now we're no longer talking about, that was Erev Chatzeros, because there was just courtyards opening up to one another. Here, we're talking about a case where there is basically streets, right? You basically have, they have these streets in between each one. So Rav Shimon, just like he held over there'd be no problem to do that. Rav Shimon holds there's no problem to do this. In other words, now over here the question is are they able to make a relationship between one another for the streets? And we say, well, since these people have some joint wine, okay, and these people, right, this is joint wine that they share, and these two, whatever, courtyards have joint oil. That's an O, that's a W. Okay, and therefore they'd be allowed. These are legitimate types of partnerships that would allow these people to carry in this streets, these people to carry in this streets. And the Chachamim, who disagree in our Mishnah, are basically saying, no, this doesn't work for the same reason that didn't work, because it's going to be confusing. Okay? That would be the way to read the Mishnah right now. That's not what they're suggesting. Okay? However, Amar le'Abaye mi dummy. He says these two, the first scenario that we drew, and this other one, they're not really comparable. Why? There, the Mishnah said the two outer ones, it said explicitly in that Mishnah that although Rav Shimon allows the one on the right to partner with the one in the center, the one on the left to partner with the one in the center, it also said explicitly that the two outer ones cannot join, they're prohibited from one another. Over here, our Mishnah is very misleading. Our Mishnah said that according to Rav Shimon, they don't have to make an eruv whatsoever. But it's not true. If they wanted to carry from the outer ones, they'd have to go ahead and make an eruv. It's like over there, it reads. Over here, you're trying to say it's the same case. Then be more clear. It's very misleading over here by saying nothing has to be done. So Mar says, no, that's not a question. What does it mean they don't have to join an eruv? The neighbors, the outer ones, don't have to make a shita for the homeowners who live in the chutzner between them. But of course, the neighbors who live on the outer ones do have to join an eruv with one another. Okay, so bottom line says the textual question is not such a strong question, and this Rabbah's explanation of our Mishnah is to say that we're dealing with the case again where they are making partnerships. The two outer ones have their own independent partnerships with the guy in the middle. According to Rav Shimon, that's fine. Okay, and according to the Chachamim, it's too confusing. Anytime you don't have everyone all joined together, but they're joined only with person in the middle, it's too confusing. Therefore, the Chachamim outlaw that. Okay, that's one way. Don't worry if you didn't catch that. New way. We're going to learn a new way to understand our Mishnah. Rav Yosef Amar at 71b1 Samacha Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. Rav Yosef Amar Rabbi Shimon Rabbanan beplukta Rav Yochanan Menuri Rabbanan Kamifligi. Okay, that they're arguing. About that the Rav Shimon and the Rabbanan are arguing about same machlokes Rav Yochanan and Nuri and the Rabbanan argue about. Ditnan, we learned in the Mishnah. If anyone tells me where we learned this Mishnah, we'll be very impressed. That what? Shemen shetzaf al gabi yain. If oil of truma is floating on top of wine of truma, okay? Oil is floating on, so you basically have a cup or you have a barrel and you have wine and it's mixed together with oil. But of course they don't mix, right? So you have wine and then you have oil on the top. Bad mixture, okay? Maybe they're making a salad dressing. I don't know. Whatever. Bottom line is they have wine on the bottom, oil on the top, okay? So v'naga tzvul yom b'shemen. And someone who's tamei, tzvul yom, touches the oil but did not touch the wine, lo pasal el shemen belvad. Then you only invalidate the oil, because although the oil is touched to the wine, but the tumah of its full yom does not go from one food to the next. So basically, again, you have a barrel, you have wine and oil. Oil's floating to the top, wine over here. The tamei person touches the oil. According to the Tanna Kama, only the oil is tamei because they're two separate entities. They're not mixed together. Okay? Rav Yochanan Nuri Omer Shneim Chiburim Zel Lazeh. Okay? And he says, no, at the end of the day, they're one entity. Granted, they don't actually mix, but it's one entity, and therefore the tamei person touches one, they're both tamei. So that is machlokas we saw quoted in the beginning of Maseches Shabbos, and touched upon the machlokas. We actually said in the context of muksa, when you had like something, we talked about if carrying things and okay, whatever. We had it anyway. We had it in the beginning of Masechus Shabbos a long time ago. Okay, the Rabbanan who invalidate the sheet of oil and wine go like the same Rabbanan over here, and basically they say again the what we're saying now is that when there is a shituf, when there is a it's not exactly this case, but there is now what we're saying is that there is there is now, it's no longer, in other words, in the case above, we were saying that, okay, there's a wine connection, there's an oil connection. Now we're saying, no. There's one connection. It's a connection of wine and oil that they all share, but one of them owns the wine and one of them owns the oil, and they're all in a bucket, right? So you have the oil and the wine. The Chachamim say, these are two separate partnerships. There's not one thing. In other words, granted, these guys own the oil together. These guys own the wine together, okay? And they poured it all into one barrel. The Chachamim say, okay, it's two separate things. It's like apples and oranges. There's not one, they don't want to see this as one partnership together, because just like in a case where a tummy person touches the oil, it's only the oil that's tummy. It's nothing to do with the wine. And Rav Shimon goes like Rav Yochanan Nuri, he says, no, oil and wine mix together, even though they don't mix, even though they're separate, at the end of the day, it's one entity, and therefore, this would be a good shituf, this would be a good partnership, and therefore, they're all able to carry from one to another. Yeah, that's the second way of understanding this. Okay, now we're going to bring in a third view different than our Mishnah. Again, our Mishnah had two views. We had the Chum said that they're allowed to join together with wine, but not wine and oil. And we had Rav Shimon who said he could do wine and oil. Now we're going to see a third view. Tanya, Elazar ben Tzadai Omer, Echad zeh v'echad zeh tzrichen la'arev. Okay, in other words, in both these cases, in a case where they join together with wine and a case where they join together with oil, it's not going to be sufficient. They need to do more. Ask the Gemara, what does it mean? Understand, what's wrong in a case where they each join together with a partnership, basically they all join together with their wines in one barrel? Why would they have to, what's wrong with that? Why would two wine partnerships that are combined together, why would that not satisfy the requirements of having a shituf? Amarabba, zeba b'ligino v'shafach, v'zeba b'ligino v'shafach. He says no. Rabba says that our Mishnah, the Brisa, when Elazar ben Tzadai says that a wine partnership is not good, he's not talking about the following case. If one person came with a jug of wine and poured it into a barrel, and the next person comes with his jug of wine and pours it into the same barrel, and now you have one barrel in the middle, which is, or whatever, one barrel which has everyone's wine together, of course that works. That would work. When do they argue? If they joined, if they bought a barrel of wine in partnership. Okay, meaning they all chipped in with money. Does that work? Is that the same as when they go ahead and actually contribute their food? Rav Elazar ben Tzadai Savar Ein Brera. Rav Elazar ben Tzadai says it's not. We don't treat that as if they each pour their own wine and therefore it wouldn't work. Okay, it's not the classic case of Brera of retroactive determination. Rabbanan Savar Yesh Brera. The Rabbanan say no. At the end of the day, even though they all came with their money, we treat it as if they all pour their own wine. In other words, like this. In a case where if I'm making a sheet, if I'm walking around and I want to go ahead and make a partnership between these different courtyards. So if I have the barrel, I come to your house and you pour in your cup of wine, your barrel of wine, your bottle of wine, and then you come and you pour your barrel of wine, 100%. Then we all mixed wine together. We assume, yeah, it's fine, 100%. That's a good partnership. Where it gets complicated is if I go ahead and you cannot do a sheet with money. I can't sheet of money that's not a good enough partnership. It has to have something substantial, it has to be something food, which is something that we actually share. So if you all contribute money and then I go and buy the wine, Elazar ben Tzadai says, at the end of the day, we didn't each combine our own foods, and therefore, granted, we all have a pile of money together, but that's nothing. The Rabbanan say no. Granted, the money's not good, but once I bought the bottle of wine, retroactively, it's as if you all poured your own wine into it. And that's what they're arguing about. So when Rav Elazar ben Tzadai said that even wine and wine doesn't work, he wasn't talking about a case where we each pour our own wine. He was talking about a case where we chipped in money and then we bought wine. That's the case that doesn't work. Okay, we're going to see another possible explanation. Rav Yosef Amar Rav Elazar ben Tzadai Rabbanan b'somchin al shituf b'mkom eruv kamifli. Okay, so he suggests they're arguing about something else, about whether a shituf that is made instead of an eruv works. Okay, so what does that mean? What that means, let's just quickly review. When these people want to carry, okay, what do they have to make? An eruv. Excellent, thank you. Okay, and these people want to make eruv, okay? But when these people want to carry, what do they have to make? A shituf, right? So the words are kind of similar. Excellent. The word eruv is basically, they kind of, a shituf is like a partnership. Eruv, we'll think about a little bit. We'll see what the difference is in a moment. Okay, we'll see what the eruv, what the difference is in a moment. But that's the basic principle. The question is, if you only have a shituf, if you only made a shituf, will that also work? To cover your eruv. Let's say you only made, meaning normally what happens is some person goes around, collects bread, and then some people go around and go ahead and make this wine connection. We'll talk about it in a moment soon. Why bread? Why wine? Why they're not the same thing? But let's say you only did the wine. At the end of the day, what is a shituf and an eruv? It's a combination. It's a partnership. So if I have a shituf, would that be sufficient to also cover the eruv? That's the question. That's what we're arguing about. Okay. So Rav Elazar ben Tzadai says that if you have a shituf, meaning when Rav Elazar ben Tzadai said even when you both have wine, it doesn't work. He wasn't talking about a case where you already had an eruv and now you're making a shituf. He's talking about a case where you only have a shituf And he's saying that doesn't work. And the Rabbanan holds, Umar Savar Somchin, the Rabbanan say, no, when you make a shita with wine, that works also for your Eruv. Right? That's what they're arguing about. Yeah.
So when I thought you make an Eruv first, so you're saying though that the Shitu, both of these guys have a partnership. Because like if it's an Eruv, doesn't only one of them have to have a partnership with the wine and then the other one have a...
Yeah, technically once one person could represent everyone else. But yeah, there'd have to be a shituf with everyone involved. Absolutely. Yes, good point. Excellent points. Okay, Amar Rav Yosef, excellent. How do I know this? Amar Rav Yosef, I'm first going to try to prove this textually, sort of. He says, how do I know that this is the explanation of the Braisa? To Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, because we have a statement from Yehuda in the name of Rav, Halachic Rameir. The halacha follows Rameir, who holds that a shituf is not allowed to be in the place of an Eruv. Okay, that you can't, if you do a shituf, Rameir holds, we're going to see it expelled out in a moment, that if you have a shituf, you can, that doesn't cover for your Eruv. V'amar Bruna Amarav, then you have another statement from Rav who says, halacha Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai, who says the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai. Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai was the one who said that when the wines combine, that's not a good Eruv, which again, we were trying to say is this machlokes. So 71b2. So my taima, what's the reason that Rav agrees with both these views? La mishum decham taimahu. Isn't because Rameir and Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai are ultimately saying the same thing? There are mayors saying that you can't, if you have a shituf, it's not going to work. You need to have an Eruv as well. And Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai, who said that you both have a shituf of wine, it doesn't work. They're ultimately saying the same thing. Now we understand why Rav, these two views actually work together. Sure. So we have two statements from Rav. Okay, we have two statements from Rav. One statement from Rav says the halacha is like Rameir. What is Rameir? Rameir we're going to see in a moment. Who says that if you have a shituf, that doesn't cover your Eruv, right? And then we also have a statement from Rav who says the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai. Now, Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai was the one who said that this brayso, which we just started off our last discussion with, who was quoted as saying, then you have a shituf of wine, it doesn't work. And Rav Yosef wanted to say, what are they talking? Why is a shituf of wine not work? Because it's only because he's explaining that we're talking about a case where it's only a shituf and not an Eruv. So they're basically saying the same thing. He says, I understand why Rav said both these statements because they're both saying the same thing. But then the obvious follow-up question, if they're actually all saying the same thing, why does he have to say two different teachings? Just say one of them and you know the point. The point is, if you have an Eruv, you can't, you have a shituf, it doesn't cover your Eruv. So Rav Yosef answers that. He says, no, hakamash malan, d'lavdina kitrei chumrei be'eruvin. Because the reason I have to spell it out is because typically we don't, very interesting principle, we've seen throughout that we have leniencies when it comes to Eruvin. Eruvin is rabbinic. And we are generally lenient by rabbinic laws. Had he just said the halacha like Rameir, that would not be sufficient. Why? Because we have a principle that we would not take two stringencies from one Tana as it applies to Eruvin. Okay? Meaning, because that's too much. Again, it's too stringent. So we might take one stringency from one Tana, another stringency from another Tana, and that would be sufficient. But we would never go ahead and do both. So what does that do over here? Because Rameir says that if a person goes ahead and uses wine for shituf, that's not going to work for an Eruv, because wine can't be used for an Eruv. Okay, but then Rameir, there's a second thing, which is that when a person, even when a person goes ahead and uses bread for a shituf, that also wouldn't work. In other words, anytime you're making a shituf, you'd also have to make an Eruv. So those are two separate chumras. They're related to each other, and therefore Rav had to come along and say the halacha is like Rameir, that a shituf can never take the place of an Eruv, and then also want to say Elazar ben Tadai to point out, even if in a scenario where you went ahead and you made a shituf with bread, that would also not work, even though bread is typically used for an Eruv, that would also not work. In other words, to be very clear that every permutation of using shituf and Eruv together is one, off the table. Had he just said the halacha is like Rameir, you would say, well, maybe only held of one stringency Rameir, but not the other. In other words, maybe only when you did a shituf of wine, that would not work for using your Eruv as well. But if you made it with bread, which bread is typically used for an Eruv as well, maybe then he would say it's okay. Kamash Malan, no. It basically no shituf Eruv overlap whatsoever. Yeah?
What about, but you can make an Eruv with wine, can't you?
An Eruv is made with bread.
You can't use wine?
You can't use wine.
I thought we discussed it.
With a shituf you can use wine. With an Eruv you can't use wine. We'll see why in a moment. Okay, so let's see. My Rameir, my Rabbanan. First, let's quote Rameir and Rabbanan. Okay, the time is taught in a brayso. Ma'arvin bechatzeros bepas. Okay, here it says explicitly you should join an Eruv with bread. And if you want to use wine, you can't use wine. Why not? Why not? The answer is like this. What is an Eruv? An Eruv basically says, I live here, right? So me and you, so we have this shared courtyard, and the goal is to make it that there's really only one, we really all share a home. We really all share a home, and therefore we all share this whole space. What defines your home? Okay, so ideally, wine is like a weird, like that's not a healthy thing. Like, oh, my home, my residence is a place where I have my wine. That's an alcoholic, right? Residence is a place where you have your food, your basic sustenance, bread. And therefore, when it comes to an eruv, the goal over here, this goal is to make it that we have one residence, right? Therefore, you need to have bread, right? And therefore, bread is the thing that works. Matzah, bread, that works. Wine, for an eruv, there's something missing over there, and therefore it does not work. Okay, v'imratzu lishtal okay, lishtatev. Okay, I don't know. I have a little type over here. Okay, v'imratzu lishtatev b'pas mishtatvin. If they want to make a shituf with bread, okay, mishtatvin mavui beyain. Sorry, I missed the line. They are allowed to make you make a shituf with wine. Now, why do you make it with wine? So here, different opinions from the Rishonim, but basically, it seems like there is ideally you don't do it with bread just to show that a shituf is different than an eruv, right? A shituf over here. Now, when you're combining over here, no one's saying I live here, right? Their focus is the street. Like no one's living here. It's that we're all partners and therefore able to carry. It's similar, but it's not the same thing. To be a partnership, you need to have a shared entity. That's not about right. That's the word shituf, right? It's a shared partnership. It's not about like we live here and therefore wine is sufficient. And some say ideally wine, so we don't confuse it with an eruv to show that they're different, right? So mishtat v'mavoi b'yain. You merge in a shituf for the mavoi with wine. V'imratz lishtatev, pas mishtatvin. If they want to merge with bread, they're allowed to. Okay, we'll see. Not everyone's going to agree with this in a second. Ma'arvin bechatzeros. Okay, you have to permit carrying in a chatzer. You have to make an erev chatzeros, mishtatvim mavoi, and then you do shituf in a mavoi. It's just laying it out. In other words, erev is what works in the chatzer. Okay, erev, and shituf is what works in the mavoi. Okay, and why do you do them both? Okay, that even so, the reason that you do that, if you already had a shituf, you still do an erev. In other words, technically, one could say once we have a shituf, once we have a partnership, that should be sufficient. Bottom line is we're all one entity. If we have a partnership, we all become one entity. So why do you still have to do an eruv? So that the children realize there's something called an eruv. Shiyam Rav Eseinu lo eruv, because they'll say, oh, our parents never made an eruv. We never saw an eruv thing. We only saw the shituf thing. And sometimes, remember, shituf's only going to be applicable when you have two people, two courtyards leading into a street. You're going to have many scenarios where you don't have two people going into a street, and therefore the children will say, oh, if it's just us, if it's just one courtyard, we don't have to do anything, because they won't realize there's even a concept of eruv, right? That's if you're a mayor, or ma'arvin, or mishtatvin. He says no. At the end of the day, you're allowed to use these things one for the other. You could use an eruv that could be used, meaning you have the bread that's used for the eruv that could be used for the shituf, or you could use the shituf of wine and that would be sufficient instead of having bread. They're not concerned. Once you're doing one thing, or a shituf, or eruv, as long as the eruv is going to be combined between the two, meaning bread between the two courtyards, then that would be sufficient. They're not afraid of people forgetting. Okay, so there we have this machlok. We're going to come back to this machlok tomorrow, but basically this machlok between the Rabbanan and Rameir. Rameir says you have to do everything exactly the way it has to be done. Eruv in the chatzar with bread, and then wine with the shituf for between the two courtyards, and the Rabbanan hold. Why? Because there's no confusion. Children later on in life, they will not get confused, and the Rabbanan holds that no, you could go ahead and have either bread for everyone, or you could have wine for everyone. You could use a shituf that covers your eruv, or you could have eruv and that covers your shituf, again, as long as the eruv is done between the two courtyards. And we'll come back and analyze this, God willing, tomorrow. Have a great day.